And we turn the page to a fall-like weather pattern, closing out the last weeks of summer. Welcome back once again to Forecast Lab. Let's take a look at that surface map. And in the northern U.S., some cool air coming out of central Canada. Temperatures well down into the 50s in North Dakota. But the southern limit of that cold air is at this cold front, stretching through northern Nebraska, and we transition over to 80s from North Platte all the way down towards Wichita. Starting to see some moisture return setting up. 60s dew points flowing northward into Kansas, and we're going to see that get even stronger over the next couple of days as we bring 70s dew points into the western Midwest region. Down south, plenty of thunderstorm activity there in Florida. There it is. And the tail end of that stationary front, it appears it's finally washed out. You can see those 70-degree isodrosotherms lurking down there around Austin and San Antonio, and we will see that low-level jet start to establish itself later tonight, looking at maybe 50 knots on that low-level jet, and that means a gusty day tomorrow, much warmer in Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and the appearance of gradually more and more thunderstorms in that part of the country. We are starting to transition out of monsoon season a little bit in Arizona. You can see those dew points have fallen off into the 50s, and no thunderstorm activity to talk about in that region. In fact, when we go to the north, much cooler air. 60s this afternoon in northern Nevada, Oregon, Boise at 70, and a very comfortable 72 at Sacramento. And that's about 50 degrees colder than what we had around the same time last week. In Alaska, Typhoon Merbok making its way up into the Bering Sea. You can see the Aleutian Islands down on the bottom part of the screen, and there it is, dropping pressures to 940 millibars. Quite low for that area, and I think the record is around 927 millibars. Typically, that's something we see in the wintertime, but here it is, September. Now, let's take a look at the surface plots. This is about 24 hours ago, Thursday afternoon. You can see that Shemya down here at the bottom left. The winds are backed, and they're out of 120 degrees relative to true north, and the pressure is down to 28.71 inches. Now, let's bring this forward. And you can see at 0Z, the winds are backing even further. Pressure's down to 28.27, and then the station goes offline. So the weather system somewhere in this area, I didn't see any major impacts on the other stations, but they do come around to the south, and they are gusty up to about 30 knots. And if you're a weather geek like me, you can take a look at the METAR trend for Shemya, and this is about where they went offline. We're going up the page with time. So yesterday, the winds were out of the east-southeast, and the pressures dropped 28.27, 28.12, and you can see the rain really setting in. And then the station went offline for about 18 hours, and after that, the winds were out of the west. So the storm was out of the picture, and the pressure up to 29.48. What happened during that period, I'm kind of curious. But these were the model runs yesterday. There's the storm, the remains of Typhoon Merbok, and you can see it working into the Bering Sea. Overnight into this morning, the model went for 938 millibars, and we're just kind of looking at a gradual dissipation as it moves up into the Bering Strait, and not much left of it by Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we're looking at other systems down there south of Anchorage. Where did that go? Yeah, there it is. So pretty stormy in the Gulf of Alaska. And later down the road, that will have some impact for Canada and the northwestern U.S. You can see that right there around the 24th and 25th. And the other item of concern, some of you probably saw that, That's the GFS deterministic forecast for Tropical Storm Fiona. At this point, this would be a hurricane. This is next weekend, but this is 200 hours out, so this is very unreliable. But I'll just go ahead and show that to you. This initial sequence up through Sunday and Monday, that probably will occur somewhat like it's showing. However, NHC taking that a little bit further north across Dominica, and then the GFS trying to develop a hurricane over the Bahamas, and you can see that skirting the east coast. We're not really looking for that scenario. Let me show you the spaghetti plot of the model runs. Yeah, there we go. We're looking at a track pretty much just south of Puerto Rico into Dominica. And it looks like the consensus next week is to recurve the storm strongly. The deterministic GFS run is taking that a little bit further to the west. And that could still happen, but very likely we're going to see recurvature. And that has been the trend with many of the storms this season due to the strong prevailing westerlies and the series of ridges that we've had up to the north over the past couple weeks. Currently, the storm is near the Leeward Islands, and it will graze Puerto Rico on Saturday night into Sunday, and then for late Sunday into Monday, it's going to cross Dominica. And because of the extensive terrain interactions, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen when it emerges on the other side. The models are not going to have a good handle on that until it is on the other side of those islands. And at that point, I would say we're going to have a better handle on what the forward track will be. Bermuda is definitely under the gun. The East Coast, not so sure. We're going to have to see what happens on Monday. And there's a quick look at the infrared satellite of Tropical Storm Fiona. At 5 p.m. Atlantic time, we had 50 miles an hour sustained, and it was moving westward at 15 miles an hour. And the ocean heat content chart, this is very useful for forecasting hurricane intensity. I don't have a scale here, but the values, that's going to be 50 kilojoules per cubic centimeter, and this orange is going to be 100. Those are some fairly significant values when we get into these yellows and oranges. And you can see that the track is heading right into those oranges, and a lot more of it along the Bahamas. So we are going to be looking at intensification of this storm, especially as it emerges north of the Dominican Republic. So this will be something to keep an eye on over the next several days. Shifting gears here, temperature records. Well, no records anywhere in the country for today. Rinse and repeat for Saturday. But on Sunday, we start to see some changes. The appearance of a heat wave, which is going to set in this part of the country early next week, and even in New York City coming up to 83 in that area. And there it goes for Monday. Temperatures coming up to 100 in Kansas, looking at 100 around Wichita, Skew-t, Salina, and around Kansas City, 95, and 95 around Columbia. Some definite expansion of that heat on Tuesday, widespread mid to upper 90s, 100 again at Salina, and 101 at Stillwater. For Wednesday, the heat spreads eastward into Arkansas and into Tennessee. 98 at Jonesboro, Arkansas, 99 at Fort Smith, 99 at Stillwater again, and we're seeing 86 at Wallops Island in Virginia. Then for Thursday, creeping into the last weeks of September, the heat wave continues. A little bit of a southward spread into the Interstate 30 and Interstate 40 corridor, and 90 again at Wallops Island. The 500 millibar chart is definitely one of my favorite charts. That's the mid-tropospheric chart, and that gives us a good handle on what the general weather pattern is. If we take a look at the current conditions, we've got that jet stream coming onto the west coast, flowing right into Portland, Seattle, and then arcing around this ridge through the Great Lakes region and back into the Maritimes. So it looks like we've kind of evolved away from that split flow pattern, And let's see, let's run that forward into the weekend. Now what we see here is a jet diving down the backside of this trough, and the trough, that's it right there, jet on the backside. And when we have that configuration, that tends to deepen the trough. So there's a good chance we're going to see this start to dig in on the west coast and probably shear off that circulation. And let's see that take place. There it is. Yep, there's that cutoff low. Well, there we go again. I'm going to consider that probably an occluded low. I don't think that's a true cutoff low there because the system is frontal in nature. I'm sure we're going to see a lineup of a cold front and warm front as we go into Sunday and Monday. Now, I do think we have a little bit of a split in the pattern. So that's it right there. And meanwhile, we've got this subtropical high establishing itself over Oklahoma, and that's helping to drive that heat wave in the central U.S. Let me back that up and show you where that came from. It grew out of this subtropical ridge right there. You can see the winds north of that, out of the west, and sort of easterly out there in the Gulf. And as that high takes hold and strengthens, you can see it start to close off, and we get that closed contour there, the 588 decameter line, and it just parks itself right there over the Red River Basin, Texas and Oklahoma, Texarkana, and really not much change into the middle of next week. Now that low out there in the Great Basin area, that does get picked up in the prevailing westerlies, probably as this series of troughs come down. And then we have this other trough coming in from the west. So eventually that circulation moves north and opens up. Meanwhile, high pressure continuing over the southern U.S. into the 22nd and 23rd. And let's see, not much change for the southern U.S., a little bit of flattening of that ridge, and just kind of a zonal flow at the end of the sequence around the 26th. And that will favor a lee-side trough in the Canadian prairies, Alberta, western Saskatchewan, and not much in the southern U.S. really. And with that troughing out there in the northeastern U.S., probably kind of a cold pattern with northwesterly flow affecting that area, a very common pattern we've seen time and time again over the past several years. And I did want to mention strong westerlies out there off British Columbia and Washington. That's definitely an indication that we're heading into more of a wintertime-like pattern. It's going to take a while for that to become established, but I do think that is definitely different than what we saw at the beginning of the run. Now, the Gulf of Alaska is stormy, but it is traversed by this polar front jet. And you can see that there's not much going on in the Pacific. The jet is more northwesterly, but at the very end of the period, towards the end of September, it is wide open. And that means a wet pattern for British Columbia, storm tracks coming on into Vancouver, Victoria, and we'll probably have a lot more to look at as we get into the first week of October. Now, of course, another thing that we need to talk about is the risk of severe weather. The day one outlook, looking at a slight risk for western Nebraska. Let's go into the day two with that influx of moisture coming up the low-level jet across Kansas into Nebraska. We're going to see a slight risk around Des Moines and up into Missouri or Minnesota. And for Sunday, an even more significant chance of severe weather focused mostly around the Quad Cities and northern Illinois. There could be some large hail and maybe some isolated tornadoes as we go through the end of the weekend. There's the storms we have going up this afternoon. Some development up there north of Douglas into the Devil's Tower area. The Black Hills located right there. And closer to the low-level moisture, the Nebraska Panhandle. They've got a few storms going on there too. The air mass there is somewhat dry in terms of relative humidity. Temperature 85, dew point 55, so they are a bit high-based. And a few cells going up as well around Canadian Texas as that low-level jet gets established. And that probably is a little bit of a dry line coming together in that area. So let's take a look at that forecast, looking at the pressure and thickness. This is about where we're at right now. We're going to see those storms evolve there in Nebraska. The model a little bit late on that development, but it continues it as an MCS into the early hours, maybe shifting into Kansas as the warm air advection gets established. It looks like most of that shuts down later tomorrow morning, and then we get round number 2 developing. That's it there coming together, maybe some cells as far south as Topeka, and maybe on down the line into Alva, Oklahoma. Then Sunday, that's probably going to be the more significant severe weather day. The prelude to that is around the 18th or 18Z. You can see the pressure gradient bringing that moisture on up into the Midwest. And then the storms go up around the Quad Cities somewhere. However, southwesterly flow still established. Probably got that ridge building in. You can see some evidence of that in the thickness lines. And then it's getting stormy out there in California. Let me paint out where the systems are. Maybe a frontal system kind of like that. And then arcing back in as an occlusion. So the California valleys in an area of cold air advection, probably kind of showery. And with that cool upper troposphere, mid and upper troposphere, we're going to see the snow levels come down to about 8,500 to 9,000 feet. So we kind of get rid of a lot of that precip by about midweek, and then you can see it kind of shifting into the Four Corners area, maybe some enhanced southerly flow, kind of reinvigorating that monsoon a bit. And then we've got this strong front coming in from the north, 1020 millibar high, pushing that down into Colorado and Utah and Nebraska. It's not going to go very far south. I mean, obviously, it's pretty early in the season for these cold fronts to be blasting south, so it'll kind of lock up there in the central plains and Midwest, and we're going to still continue that southerly flow in Texas and Oklahoma. We do have that risk of a hurricane kind of offshore there. Again, right now we're not looking for landfall on that. And then further to the north looks like a pretty good MCS moving through New England. That's going to be Thursday next week. So probably some severe weather risk in that part of the country. And going into the following weekend, 24th, 25th, looks fairly quiet. I do see by the thickness contours, there's some evidence of a stationary backdoor front. Yeah, that's going to be in this area right here. So that's our little stationary backdoor front, kind of right there. So it might be a little bit cloudy up in this region, maybe some showers and weak areas of rain around. Not much upper air support. And I guess this is our September doldrums. After that, and 300 hours out, we're not going to worry about that. So that'll do it for your Friday webcast. So we'll go ahead and give you the aerial footage, and we're going to go back to 2018. This is some footage from late September of 2018 out here in Texas. Definitely a cool weather pattern. And we got many comments on Wednesday's video on YouTube. Thank you for posting comments, observations, suggestions, and questions. Definitely keep doing that. That's certainly good for the channel, and that'll definitely help the program. And of course, another way to help the program is to be a Patreon contributor. And I guess that'll do it for me. Hope you have a great weekend. Take care, and we will see you on Monday for the supporters and Wednesday for everybody else. Have a good one. Bye-bye.